At 0542 hours, just 87 miles east of Taiwan, the US Navy's MQ-4C Triton, a high-altitude, long-endurance surveillance drone, cruised above the Pacific at 53,000 feet. Its mission: monitor Chinese naval movements near the Taiwan Strait. Routine, legal, predictable. But this morning would be anything except routine, because at 0547 hours, a Chinese Type 052D destroyer, lurking beneath scattered cloud cover, made a decision no one expected. It opened fire. The destroyer's radar locked onto the American drone. Its HQ-16 missile bay opened, and the sea erupted with the roar of a missile launch. The Chinese had just fired on a US military asset in international airspace, and the next 14 minutes would decide whether the Pacific stayed calm or ignited into chaos. One moment, the drone was alone. The MQ-4C Triton carried no weapons, no countermeasures, no escort. It wasn't built for combat, it was built for intelligence. From its altitude, the drone's camera captured the moment the Chinese destroyer executed the launch sequence. The missile plume expanded, bright white against the deep blue ocean. Inside the Triton's control center, located thousands of miles away in Guam, analysts froze as the missile streaked upward. Destroyer launching, confirm hostile action. Another operator shouted, "The missile is tracking us. Repeat, missile is tracking Triton 1. The room erupted into controlled chaos, because an attack on a US surveillance platform is not an accident, not a misunderstanding, not a warning. It's a trigger point. 0548 hours. The missile climbs. The HQ-16 missile, Mark 3.5, sliced through the clouds. From its nose cone, the missile's active radar seeker locked onto the Triton's signature. Inside the control room, the mission commander barked, "Evasive pattern Delta. Get that thing turning now." The Triton banked hard left, far harder than a drone its size normally would. But even so, something became clear. It wasn't fast enough to outrun an HQ-16 missile. The analysts watched the missile and drone icons converge on the screen. And then, missile proximity warning, impact in 12 seconds. The US destroyer reacts, but the Triton wasn't alone. Stationed 41 miles away was the US Navy destroyer USS John Finn, part of the American Missile Defense Patrol around Taiwan. At 0549 hours, the John Finn's SPY-1 radar detected the Chinese missile's climb profile. The ship's combat information center erupted with alarms. Unknown missile launch detected. Trajectory indicates American asset. The operations officer shouted, "Get a firing solution on that missile. Move." The radar operators worked at lightning speed. Within seconds, the John Finn had identified launch source Chinese Type 052D. Intended target MQ-4C Triton. Time to intercept less than 30 seconds. The commanding officer issued one order: prepare to engage. We are going to save that drone. The countermeasure launch. The missile from the Chinese destroyer climbed higher. Inside the Triton's control center, operators watched the thermal feed. The missile grew larger, closer, seconds away. Then the radio crackled. Triton 1, this is John Finn. Deploying SM-2 intercept. Brace for shockwave. Inside Guam, the Triton crew held their breath. Back near Taiwan, the John Finn's vertical launch system roared open. A US SM-2 missile blasted into the sky, a streak of white fire rising from the American destroyer's deck. On the radar screen, two blips raced toward each other. Chinese missile, American missile, closing fast. The tension inside both nations' command centers spiked into a silent frenzy. 0550 hours. The mid-air collision, altitude 44,000 feet. The American SM-2 missile and the Chinese HQ-16 intersected at blistering speed. And then, boom! A massive white detonation burst in the sky. Debris scattered across the thin upper atmosphere. The shockwave rippled like a silent thunderclap. In the Triton's camera feed, bright fragments streaked downward. Inside Guam, the room exploded into cheers. Triton 1, missile destroyed, you're clear. But this wasn't over, not even close, because the Chinese destroyer didn't fire one missile, it fired two. At 0551 hours, the second missile. Radar operators aboard the John Finn shouted, "Second launch, second launch." A second HQ-16 missile leapt from the Chinese destroyer, heading straight for the Triton. This was no accidental engagement. This was a deliberate escalation. John Finn's captain issued the order instantly. Launch SM-6, full intercept. Moments later, a more advanced, faster, deadlier missile, the SM-6 GeoWar, launched into the sky in a pillar of fire. This wasn't just defensive, this was symbolic. SM-6 is overkill for a drone defense mission. It was a message the Chinese Chinese destroyer understood instantly. The second intercept, altitude 40,000 feet, speed Mach 5.1. The SM-6 closed the distance with terrifying precision. The Chinese missile arced upward, scanning, adjusting, refining its lock, but it was too slow. The SM-6 slammed into it with pinpoint accuracy. A second explosion lit up the sky, even larger than the first. The Triton shook violently in the shockwave, but stabilized. Inside the destroyer's command center, the radar operator shouted, "Threat eliminated, drone safe." The captain nodded once, but he also knew China's destroyer had fired twice on an American aircraft. 0552 hours. The sky near Taiwan still glowed from the twin explosions of the SM-2 and SM-6 intercepts. The MQ-4C Triton steadied itself, its wings trembling from the shockwaves. The US destroyer USS John Finn had just saved it, twice, but saving the drone was only the beginning, because the Chinese destroyer, the Type 052D Hefei class, had fired 2 missiles at a US military aircraft in international airspace. This was no mistake, no misfire, no warning shot. It was an attack, and the US Navy was about to respond. The John Finn locks on. Inside the CIC of the USS John Finn, the commanding officer stood firm. "Combat, confirm the Hefei class is still tracking us." The radar chief replied, "Confirmed, sir. They've moved to weapons posture. Fire control radar is active." The CO exhaled slowly. A Chinese destroyer pointing fire control radar at an American destroyer is the naval equivalent of putting a gun to someone's head. He issued the next order: track all their launchers, bring counter battery online. The John Finn's SPY-1 radar rotated, illuminating the sea with unseen power. On the Hefei-class destroyer, alarms began blaring. The Chinese crew panicked as the ship's sensors detected the lock. "American destroyer has painted us. Repeat, Spy-1 lock." The Chinese captain clenched his jaw. "Prepare anti-ship missiles. Do not fire until ordered." The Pacific held its breath. 0555 hours. Taiwan enters the fight. Taiwan's air defense network had been monitoring the chaos since the first missile launch. The Taiwanese Air Force made a rapid decision: scramble the F-16Vs from Hualien, full payload. Within minutes, 4 Taiwanese F-16V fighters, upgraded with AESA radar and AIM-120C7 missiles, rocketed into the sky. Their mission was simple: protect the American destroyer, show they will not tolerate Chinese aggression near their airspace. As they climbed, their radios lit up with US Navy chatter. "Taipei Control, this is John Finn. We have active threat from a planned destroyer. Assistance appreciated." Taiwan responded instantly. "We're on our way." The Air Force joins the blade. 0560 hours. From Kadena Air Base, Japan, the US Air Force scrambled 2 F-35A Lightning IIs. The American pilots received the briefing mid-runway. Chinese destroyer fired on Triton reconnaissance drone. Situation escalating rapidly. "You are weapons tight unless fired upon." The F-35s took off, cutting through the morning air like silver blades. The Pacific was filling with aircraft. US F-35, A's Taiwanese F-16Vs, the MQ-4C Triton still circling, and the Chinese destroyer now operating under combat conditions. The confrontation was turning into a multinational standoff. The Chinese destroyer makes a critical mistake. 0564 hours. The Chinese Hefei class issued a final warning. "Unidentified American destroyer, you are operating in Chinese-claimed waters. Withdraw immediately." The USS John Finn responded calmly, "You fired first. We will not withdraw." The Chinese captain hesitated. Frustration boiled over. He ordered, "Activate CIWS. Prepare for close-range engagement." The Chinese ship's Type 113-0 rapid-fire gun rotated, an extremely provocative move. The radar operator aboard the John Finn yelled, "Sir, their CIWS is spinning up." The captain answered with a command that would change the tone of the entire conflict: "Deploy the birds." And with that, the USS John Finn launched 2 RIM-162 Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles, ESSMs, but not as weapons, as decoys. The missiles shot skyward, streaking past the Chinese destroyer and diving into empty ocean space, detonating harmlessly. A warning shot, a demonstration, a message: we can hit you anytime we choose. The Chinese ship realizes the trap. The Chinese captain gasped. He had expected the US destroyer to flee or stay defensive. Instead, the Americans had used a non-lethal launch to show radar dominance, displaying that the US could bypass the Chinese ship's sensors at will. Fear crept into the Chinese crew. Their operations officer whispered, "Sir, if the Americans engage us, we cannot survive." The captain knew the Type 052D was powerful, but not powerful enough to withstand a full US destroyer destroyer strike, F-35s in the air, and Taiwanese jets inbound. He realized they were surrounded, checkmated. The face-off reaches critical point, 0602 hours. F-35s arrived first, descending from the north. F-16VS approached from the east. The Triton resumed altitude. The John Finn closed to a deliberate standoff distance. Every radar, every sensor, every missile lock pointed at the Chinese destroyer. It was alone, hopelessly outmatched. The Chinese captain called Beijing for instructions. Beijing replied, "Hold position. Do not fire again." He stared at his radar screen in silence. The Chinese retreat, 0605 hours. Knowing he had no options left, the Chinese captain issued the order, "Spin down weapons, disengage radar, withdraw south." A sigh of relief swept across the Pacific command networks. On board the John Finn, the operations officer confirmed, "Chinese destroyer is turning. They're retreating, one by one." The F-35s, F-16Vs, and the Triton confirmed the withdrawal. The crisis was over. The war that almost started didn't. The US response after the incident. Hours later, the Pentagon issued a message that echoed across the Indo-Pacific. Any hostile action against US aircraft will be met with decisive and proportional force. But behind closed doors, the internal report said something far more direct. The next time a Chinese warship fires on a US aircraft, we will end that ship. In the waters near Taiwan that morning, the Chinese Navy attempted to shoot down a US surveillance drone. Instead, they triggered a US destroyer missile intercept, a multi-nation fighter response, a total radar and airspace dominance event, a forced retreat. The message was heard loud and clear. Fire at America once, you will never get a second chance.